Hello, everyone. My name is Bradley Jackson with the Tennessee Chamber and Tennessee Manufacturers Association. And I want to thank each and every one of you all for joining us today, which is the second of our three series where we're providing a number of manufacturing updates. You all know normally we do these all across the state, and in some years have had up to as many as 13 different events, in manufacturing facilities, highlighting the tremendous work and great things that are made all across Tennessee. Due to the pandemic, we've moved all these virtually this year to cover a number of important topics. As the State Manufacturers Association, I wanted to tell you all a little bit about manufacturing just to set the tone for today. Tennessee has a strong, long, and proud tradition of manufacturing strength. Overall, in Tennessee, manufacturers employ about 350,000 Tennesseans and over 5,000 firms all across our great state in all sizes and sectors. Manufacturing contributes about 20% of our total state GDP, making it really one of the largest sectors in our state and placing Tennessee really in the top 10 states in terms of our manufacturing strength. So when you look at the top industries in Tennessee in manufacturing overall, automotive and motor vehicle parts come in at the largest. Then food, beverage, tobacco is next. Chemical manufacturing comes in after that, and then fabricated metal, appliances, and electrical machinery, and then paper manufacturing and plastics and rubber production kind of comes in as well as our top manufacturing sectors. This today will be this is our second out of third, as I mentioned, of our manufacturing roadshows. We're going to highlight supply chain and pandemic response. Our first series was really focused on technology and automation and all the changes that's really been forced in the manufacturing sector due to the pandemic. And then on November 24th, we hope you all will join us for the future of manufacturing and what manufacturers can expect really moving forward with the pandemic, and also a number of political changes as well. So we have a great program there. I do want to take a moment and thank all of our sponsors. Without our sponsors, we really couldn't do this without you all. So our presenting sponsor is TVA, Gold Level, Innovative Consulting Group, Toyota Tennessee, Lee Company, Aetna, Elliott Davis, First American, and Bridgestone. So I want to thank all of our sponsors. I'm now going to introduce our first speaker. We are proud to have Alan Davis with us today. And I would remind you all, if you do have questions throughout his discussion, please feel free to enter all questions into the chat area. Carolyn will pick those up, and then at the appropriate time, we will answer those questions. Alan, thank you so much for joining us today. Alan is currently, he's in Utah, and we were talking earlier about that there's a lot of snow on the ground in Utah, and he asked if there was any here in Tennessee, and we said, no, not yet, but we're all hoping. Alan is CEO of I5 Services, chairman of C-Suite Networking Manufacturing Council. He's a founding member and CEO, as I mentioned, of I5 Services. For the last 25 years, he's been assisting companies like Boral, Walmart, British Airways, Rite Aid, and Hertz to improve their bottom line results. He started I5 Services with the goal of changing industries through creative technical solutions to complex business problems. His background in technology and years of experience in leadership, transformation, process improvement, business IT alignment, and employee engagement and retention have helped him excel in implementing solutions that bring about disruptive improvement. Alan, thank you so much for joining us today, and we're glad to have you with us.
Thanks so much, Bradley. It's a pleasure to be with you today, and happy to come and be a part of your discussion, hoping that we can contribute a few things that may be of some use and some help to those who are with us. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and if you'll just make sure that you're able to see that, give me an indication that we're good there. Great. As Bradley mentioned, I chair the C-Suite Manufacturing Council, and on that council, we've been working. Well, by the way, I'm also the CEO of I5 Services. We're a technology company. We've been working tirelessly for the last 8 years to connect the U.S. manufacturing supply chain. It's a monumental undertaking and a very challenging one when you figure we have depending on whose numbers you look at, anywhere between about 250 to 300,000 US manufacturers, and trying to connect that together and be able to see our US manufacturing supply chain and capabilities has been a daunting task. So in connection with that, on the Manufacturing Council, we discussed the challenges and problems that face US manufacturing today, what some possible solutions to those challenges might be. We come up with best practices, and we help to communicate those best practices out into the manufacturing ecosystem. So I'm going to share with you just a few quotes coming from a document created in that council. The document is the Blueprint for the Future of U.S. Manufacturing Supply Chain. And as part of that, I want to make sure that we're able to share not just that, but some of the learnings that we've had coming out of that council that I think may be of some use and some value to you today. So just to lead off, a quick quote. I think we're all somewhat familiar with at this point in time some of the challenges that we're facing, not just with the pandemic, but with manufacturing in general. For many years, we've been facing a number of problems and challenges in manufacturing, up to and including, and we'll talk a little bit about this later in the presentation, a perception problem that we have with what manufacturing is and why people would want to be involved in it. So I can share these slides at the end as well if anyone has an interest in seeing them. But in the blueprint, we identify 3 areas of concern. And there's an overdependence that we have on foreign supply, particularly in some of our key supply areas. We've identified 4 major key supply areas that are critical to national defense. That's our pharmaceutical supply, our medical supply, our food supply, and our defense supply. And the pandemic has really brought that to light and has helped us realize just how critical and how fragile the supply of those items are in our country. The lack of a national strategy and plan for addressing supply chain deficiencies is also a key concern, and a lack of collaboration to address those key concerns. We also have talked a little bit about what an ideal future state might look like. And so there are 3 key takeaways from that I wanted to share with you today. One is that we have to produce at least those 4 key areas of manufacturing in the US with appropriate stockpiles to ensure that we have the ability to supply for ourselves items which are critical to national defense. We must have a national strategy that is implemented that at a minimum addresses some of the key areas that we face in manufacturing. Our sustainability and resiliency, our competitiveness. We've got to make sure that we have a robust and collaborative manufacturing ecosystem that is connected and secure. Prior to working on the manufacturer's marketplace, which is the solution we've created nationally to connect manufacturing supply chain, we had no solution that would actually help us connect our US manufacturing supply chain together. So another thing that we have identified in the blueprint is some actions that need to be taken. And those actions stem from everything from at the consumer level to buying more US made manufactured products, to the policy level in changing some policies and practices which have inhibited growth of manufacturing in the US. To summarize some of those, I just want to touch on a couple of them, and we broke them into certain categories. First, you see the individuals there, and then manufacturers. For manufacturers, there are a number of key areas for us to kind of keep an eye on, things that we really must look at and work on together. But workforce is certainly one of the big ones, as is supply chain. You'll see a number of those listed in the bullet points here. Sustainability is a word that we hear talked about a lot right now, sustainability and resiliency, which can apply both to the manufacturing as well as to the workforce. So we'll touch on that a little bit later in the presentation as well. The second part of actions to be taken is really around collaboration. So it's not just what individuals must do or what manufacturers must do, but it's what we must do together and together with government. And we have to be able to work together. We have to be able to come up with a supportable plan that will allow us to have a better outcome going forward than what we've had in the current climate and certainly in the past as well. And the last area of collaboration is really the collaboration that must take place between government and academia. It has been at times, I'm wondering if my connection is struggling there. Hopefully that corrected itself. When we've had the greatest amount of production and innovation has been at the times when we have come together as a country and we've had industry working together with government and with academia. If you look at, for example, just after World War II, where there was a tremendous amount of collaboration across those three areas, we had some of the greatest growth in manufacturing. So those are some areas to keep an eye on and some things to keep in mind as we talk about the actions to be taken. Today, I just want to touch very shortly, very briefly on the logistics, the production, and the workforce of supply chain. I actually just attended a presentation given by some members of the Navy and borrowed actually a few statistics that they shared. They talked about China's One Belt, One Road initiative. As we start talking about logistics and particularly the shipping portion of the logistics, they own the largest port and logistics company in the world. 90% of the world's trade is by ship, and over 1/3 of the ships are built in China, and including 96% of the shipping containers. They control about 1/3 of the world's logistics, and they build 1,200 ships per year versus the US's 8. They are acquiring control of major ports worldwide and at choke points. So there's a very clear initiative to control the world's logistics, and one which we absolutely must keep our eye on in the world of manufacturing. Another slide that I thought was very informative, it kind of shows the participating countries in their Belt and Road Initiative. And that should give us pause as we start to think about the logistics of supply chain. So a few suggestions. First off, there is some current legislation that helps protect U.S. manufacturing trade and logistics, and it's referenced as the Jones Act. As much as we may or may not like legislation, we all must get involved and be informed and be a part of lobbying legislation which helps manufacturing. We've got to learn more about our downstream supply. If you have not experienced some sort of disruption in your supply chain during this pandemic, then it's unlikely that your downstream supply is coming from overseas. Everyone we have spoken to has experienced some sort of delay or disruption in the supply chain due to the pandemic and logistics associated with, and the logistics interruptions associated with the pandemic. And another thing to think about is including some requirements in your contracts. You can't necessarily ask to see your supplier's downstream supply chain, but you can certainly ask to know the percentage of overseas supply or dependence upon that supply, so that you have better visibility into where your products are coming from and the components that make up your products. A few facts in production. During the first decade of the century, 78,000 manufacturers closed their doors. 6 million jobs were lost. Supply chain costs, surprisingly, went up 7% during the time that we did a massive offshoring effort. And the costs remained relatively unchanged in the previous 10 years to that. 52% of the manufacturing being completed outside the US could be completed with the same or higher quality and same or lower cost in the US. Now that's an important point because there is an effort now, and many people are seeing the need for reshoring certain types of manufacturing to the US. And so keeping that in mind helps us understand or realize it's not necessarily cost that's driving us overseas. Sometimes it can be produced better or cheaper here in the US. So a few suggestions there. We need to reduce our dependence on overseas supply. We need to see our supply chain and the challenges in it. So visibility of the supply chain is a challenging and difficult thing for most small manufacturers. There are a few solutions. The ones that we've built, we've actually put supply chain visibility into our Connect solution, where you can actually visualize your entire supply chain. You can see gaps, threats, and weaknesses in that supply chain. Find alternate suppliers, see the distance from your current facilities where those suppliers are located, and be able to have a better handle on what's happening in your supply chain. We've been working with the Air Force for a number of years to identify the highest areas of risk, and we put technology in place to help companies mitigate those areas of risk, and those efforts are ongoing. Also, it's important to know the resources that are available to help you. So knowing your chamber, your manufacturing association, your MEP, your PTAC, and others who are resources to help you with the challenges that you might be facing or experiencing are critical and important resources to be aware of. So a few workforce facts. China produces 20% of the global manufacturing, and they employ about 130 million people to do that. We produce 18% of the global manufacturing with close to 16 million people. So with 1/12 of the workforce, we have an almost equal amount of production. Now that's a really staggering statistic when you think about it, because that means we're 12 times more productive with our people than they are in China. And so that should give us a certain degree of hope and a certain level of comfort that we have the ability to innovate, we have the ability to produce and to compete, particularly in those four main areas of manufacturing that we talked about earlier. So prior to the pandemic, there was a shortage of workforce that was being projected of roughly 6 million jobs in the manufacturing workforce. Well, that problem has not necessarily gone away. We've had disruptions, we've had changes, but the need is still there. And so there's a tremendous amount of need to address the workforce challenges, which impact our supply chain. So our ability to produce is directly impacted by the workforce that we have available to us to produce the goods and services that our manufacturers produce. So another fact is that there is a manufacturing perception problem. And that perception problem is all over our country, from politicians to elementary students and everyone in between. And the way that they view and see manufacturing today is often an antiquated view of manufacturing. Old, dirty, and rundown factories, highly pollutant areas. In reality, much of our current manufacturing today is very clean, it's sustainable, it's very technology driven, a tremendous amount of production coming out of there that is exciting from a technical perspective and innovative. And so a lot of reasons why people should engage in the workforce in manufacturing, and yet the perception problem often keeps a lot of people out of that. So a few suggestions there. We all have to work together to help get the word out about manufacturing. We need to make workforce acquisition and retention a priority. We need to align our day-to-day work with the mission and values of the company. This is something I spoke about recently in an employee retention summit, where if our employees can understand how their day-to-day work actually impacts and influences someone else's life in a positive way, then it's much easier for them to be able to get behind and support and be involved in the company and the company's goals. And so ensuring that our workforce has an understanding of how their day-to-day work ties to or how it contributes to the life of another human being is really an important thing. And then creating relationships with sources of the workforce, tech colleges and universities, high schools, training programs. There's lots of places where we can create those relationships to ensure we have access to the workforce. Thank you very much. I put a lot of information out there very quickly with the hope that we could actually take a few questions and answer a few of those in our time that we have today. And as I mentioned, I'm happy to make slides available if anyone has an interest in any of this information after the fact. So Carolyn, any questions that we could answer?
Sure, Alan, thank you so much. I know one of the questions was about getting a copy of your presentation, so it sounds
okay.
like you're fine if we share that after this.
Absolutely.
Excellent. Excuse me, I don't see any questions. If we have any come in, I will follow up with you. And we're actually right on time, so I think we do want to go ahead on over to Jim, and Jim is going to do some introductions. But thank you so much, Alan, for your time.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Alan. It's a pleasure working with you and the team of I5 and Marketplace. Thanks, Carolyn. And moving on, longtime chamber member Lee Company understands the importance of manufacturing and supports its advancement through education. With that, we are fortunate to have Lee's brand specialist, Emily Bonomo, here to introduce our next speaker. Emily ensures brand integrity and consistency across several channels and is the community development driver, a Franklin resident, and enjoys spending time with her husband, Nick, and their 2 kids and 2 dogs. Emily?
Hello, everyone. Nice to meet you all. So yes, it's an honor to introduce our next speaker. Dr. Chad Autry is the FedEx Corporation Endowed Professor of Supply Chain Management and Department Head of Supply Chain Management in the Haslam College of Business at the University of Tennessee. His research focuses on collaborative and socially responsible supply chain relationships and how supply chains must transform in order to adapt to future global trends. He's also the author of over 70 research studies published in academic and professional outlets, and an author and contributor to 3 books that focus on future supply chain management practices. Dr. Autry's professional background is in retail operations, and he's worked with and for numerous corporate, nonprofit, and governmental organizations on supply chain transformation. He's past editor-in-chief of the Journal of Supply Chain Management and currently is associate editor for 3 other supply chain management academic journals. Wow, I'm impressed, are you? Without further ado, Dr. Autry.
Well, thanks for that, Emily. It's very good to be with your group, and given that manufacturing is going to play a huge role in helping us all get through this pandemic, it's exciting to get a chance to talk to you today. I'm going to share my screen here if I can possibly do so. Let me see if I can make that happen. Hopefully that is now visible. Maybe. So yeah, I found Alan's presentation to be very interesting too, Emily. I think it aligns very much with what we're seeing here at UT. I'll just spend 15 minutes or so with you here today on what some of my colleagues and I are developing a kind of a presentation called Supply Chain 2021 COVID Style. That kind of dovetails with my futuristic take on things. Just some observations we've had from the past 9 months and our views of how things might go for the next several as we live through our first COVID winter and head into the spring of 21, hopefully with a vaccine on the horizon. I'll also say that 15 minutes is hard for a college professor, so give me the hook anytime you have to. We get paid by the word. Real quick, a little bit about our faculty for those of you that don't know about us, and I'll go ahead and go to presentation mode here. We're a group of 29 faculty and students and staff here at the university with 1,400 students actually. We're now the largest program in North America. Very proud to say that, and so it's kind of an exciting time to be at UT. We kind of drive and thrive through our industry partners. We have 73 partners that help us, folks like here in the room. So I credit you with most of the ideas that I'm about to show here today. We also have some very awesome products, and I think our best product is our 1,400 students, 500 of which will be graduating in the next few months. And so if you want to talk to me about any of those students, please let me know. For us, supply chain means a fully integrated end-to-end system. So it's not just what's happening inside the four walls of the box. It's what's happening all the way up and all the way downstream. And that goes from our supply base and down to our end customer. And so I'd like to kind of talk to you today just for a few minutes about how we see the supply chain operating during and through the coronavirus. And again, it starts and ends with the customer. And so I'm going to go ahead and introduce you very quickly, if I can, just to an example customer. This is my son, Drew Autry. Drew is a customer. He's just like many of those you might have. Drew's a unique customer because, well, not just because he's got a snake around his neck in this picture, but he's also an avid soccer player. And so not too long ago, he out in the market for a jersey that he wanted to buy so that he could wear it to a game that I guess didn't end up happening because of the virus. But he wanted this Manuel Neuer jersey from Germany, and he dialed up soccer.com, the website that we've trained him to go to when he wants something for soccer, and he's supposed to clear his purchases with us. And he pulls up this jersey that's a little bit more expensive than I wanted to pay for, but he entered his order on soccer.com on August 4th and was given a promised delivery date of November 13th. And for those of you that have been dealing with bricks and clicks in the last few months, this is pretty typical of what's been happening anytime we've had to engage a supply chain that goes worldwide just lately. And so as I think about Drew's experience and that promised delivery in the world that we live in now, which is what I refer to as Amazonified, where everything that we want is at our fingertips and it's available on a next day or maybe even next hour basis. A 2.5 month, 3 month lag in order to delivery is simply unacceptable. And so many organizations these days are sort of struggling. The current circumstances are not all that conducive to providing an Amazonified supply chain experience because we're dealing with disruptions typically we're dealing with disruptions in a specific country or region rather than the entire globe. This is really the first time we faced a problem of this scale and scope that the coronavirus is presenting. And so what makes it challenging for global supply chains is really a couple of things. One, in a global supply chain, there's really not much surplus capacity. We kind of have trained our businesses over time that supply chains are cost-cutting tools. And so as a result of that, what we tend to do is we make them as lean as possible whenever we can. And so there's not a lot of backup capacity in the chain. And then second of all, especially in the case of my son, we're now operating not just one supply chain per company, but sometimes multiple supply chains per company due to the growth of e-commerce and product flows happening simultaneously in the brick and the click realms. And so this makes order fulfillment and product replenishment pretty complex. And so it's becoming more and more difficult, especially during a time when we can't really rely on supply and demand being easily predictable to build a chain that's really going to work in live time. And so you layer on top of that what we saw back in the spring, which was a series of panic buys, things like toilet paper and hand sanitizer and baby wipes and that kind of stuff. And suddenly it's pretty tough to do manufacturing. It's tough to do supply chain that's good for the customer. And so we're going to go. I'm going to take you through a little quick journey, just 5 or so minutes, about what I think the state of the supply chain is. And then take you from there briefly into what I think it's going to look like for the next year or so. So the state of supply chain, at least per the Institute of Supply Management, a little bit of a calendar of events if you haven't seen these things yet. Back in April, more than 44% of U.S. companies didn't have a plan in place to address a supply chain disruption coming from an Asian supplier. It's kind of shocking if you think about it, because the most important thing we do is breathe inventory into our systems. But as it turns out, many companies really had no backup plan. And as Alan indicated earlier, thinking about having multiple suppliers for things is a little bit foreign to many companies, because we build a good relationship with the ones we like, and then we tend to say, well, let's just do what we can to keep that relationship solid. And we don't think about what might happen in case something really goes wrong. And so then we wake up in late April, manufacturers and assemblers in China begin operating at 50% capacity, and then that even begins to decline further. And suddenly we struggle a lot to satisfy demand for customers. And so then in July, we wake up and 57%, according to the ISM survey, 57% of U.S. manufacturers note a longer lead time for tier 1 China source components. The average lead time is now about twice what it was a year before that. And then, of course, in August, about 60% of companies now are experiencing delays, and that's what happened to my son through soccer.com when he ordered his Adidas shirt. And I said Nike there, but it's Adidas. And then we get to September, and then 48% of manufacturers are experiencing delays moving goods through ports. And so we're really kind of in this, and it was kind of analogous to a blood clot. We got to a point where this supply chain system was in danger of having a bit of a stroke. And so what does this mean for me and you and Drew? Well, it means a couple of things. One of those is that inventory is now uncertain. And when inventory is uncertain and people place orders with you, you're in a little bit of a pickle, because if your demand forecasts are off, you're not going to have exactly what the customer wanted. We've got most of that corrected in the last 3 or 4 months. We're starting to understand demand a little bit better. And so you'll notice that the shelves are full again when you go to Target. But the problem is now mainly on the supply side. I've got a sense of what demand ought to be, and I can get the shelves full, at least momentarily, but can I match demand to supply in the long term? And so a lot of consumers are taking matters into their own hands. And I'll tell you what Drew did. He canceled his order from soccer.com, and he went to the United Kingdom, pulled up uksoccershop.com, hit the international air button. He did this with his mother's permission, not mine, but he pulled it off, and he got his jersey in 4 days. And so a lot of us are starting to think about, well, if I can't get what I need when I need it, what's my response going to be? And for a lot of customers, I'm not really willing to wait 12 weeks. I would like to have it in 24 hours, and I'm going to do whatever I've got to do to make it happen. And so we're all losing business when we can't think about exactly what our chain's going to look like 2 or 3 months out. I'm envisioning a couple of potential scenarios coming, and following this as an amateur epidemiologist, and then looking also at the vaccine possibilities that are coming along. I imagine that we're going to have another contraction of the economy and another bit of supply disruption. I do think that we're getting smarter, though, about the things that are going to be disrupted and how we're going to react. And so, as you'll see here in a bit, it may not be the same things that we're going to be running out of that we ran out of before. We're just going to be we're going to have some different types of inconveniences as we press on through this. A lot of this has to do with transportation. You say it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. I think that describes this last year pretty well. But the over-the-road transportation remains a big question mark moving into 2021. Last year, I guess in 2018, really, there was a surge in capacity in transportation that came from the economy booming. People decided finally, for the first time since 2008, to really re-enter the transportation provider market. And you saw a little bit of a surge go up in capacity. Well, that got more than overwhelmed in late 2019, early 2020 as the virus spread globally. And so we are now back to a point where over-the-road transportation remains a question mark moving into 2021. And I'm hearing right now that up to half of shippers are worried about whether or not they'll have the capacity to do what they really want to do in the next year. And so what does that bring us to? Well, we have to begin to rethink carrier relationships. We have to begin to rethink what contracts look like. And we also have to be highly cognizant of the fact that just because transportation is contracted for, it may not be available when we really need it. And so this is going to present quite a few questions over the next 5-6 months. And so in my mind, if there's a big problem in the U.S. Economy as pertains to the supply chain right now, it is whether or not we'll be able to actually fulfill demand because of transportation, not because of inventory availability. And so that's going to be something we have to continue to stare at as goes on. And I've got some statistics to share at the end if we have a little time. Part of that is also because we've got a little bit of an imbalance in ocean capacity. You'll see in the last year or so, as the virus began to spread, Chinese exports went down because of the country's freeze. Then they came back up when the country reopened a little bit ahead of Europe and a little bit ahead of us, and now they're going back down again. Well, one of the things that phenomena is causing is that there's a lot of container ships that are off the shore of China right now. And they're sort of sitting around wondering, well, are we going to be used? Are we not going to be used? But there's not a lot of capacity, not a lot of extra of those in the United States. And so container shipping is about to become, for a period of 5 or 6 months, expensive and kind of scarce. And so especially, you should especially be worried about this if you're somebody that actually exports to China, because we don't actually have the vehicles here to to get things back on the ocean. Our port capacity is fine. We don't actually have the boats to get them back over and through the canal and back to the east. And so a little bit of a difficulty with ocean capacity until about February or March, probably, when some of those things start really flying back to the United States. And then something that you may not be aware of as an average consumer, but it's really on my mind a lot lately, is the airline industry. When we shut down back in the spring, there was quite a few flights canceled for passengers. And if you're not aware, there's a lot of cargo on passenger airlines. In fact, as you look at a passenger airline's profitability, over 50% of that is usually attributable to something that's being held in the cargo hold versus the people that are sitting up top. And so our belly capacity was like the Chinese ocean carriage. The belly capacity went down and then up and now down again as fewer flights are beginning to operate. And so capacity between Asia and North America is historically less belly dependent. And one of the things that I think is pretty cool right now is because there's a number of countries that are sort of embargoing United States passengers from entering. We can take those international airplanes and we can reconfigure them and repurpose them to carry cargo, and so we can do that domestically now. And so there's a lot of talk right now in the airline industry about how can we use planes right now to move high value critical goods domestically in the U.S. for the next several months in order to kind of drive some of those prices back to a state of realism. And so if people don't fly, typically goods don't either, but we may have a solution or two if we can get our Congress to kind of get along a little bit longer and work together. So those are just some thoughts that we're having. I'll close with a couple of quick anecdotes. In 2020, toilet paper became like the ultimate symbol. I saw people with Zoom backgrounds of giant pyramids of toilet paper behind them, things of that nature. I don't think it's going to be toilet paper in 2021. We've already learned our lesson. We're smart in terms of the types of things that we remember. So we'll probably have enough rubber gloves and we'll probably have enough hand sanitizer and all that. But I do think we're going to have other shortages. And I think some of those are going to be in the areas of personal care supplies and tools. You don't have to raise your hand, but I know at least a few of you gave yourself a haircut this year, guys. Don't do that again. If you do plan to do that again, you probably will have to use second-rate clippers because those are all going to be gone. We're going to have, we've taught ourselves to bake. And so ladies and gentlemen, if you're out there and you're going to be baking this fall, be aware that you may not have enough cooking oil and you may not have enough eggs to do that. So think about those things. And popcorn is a huge one, by the way. I've got stories and stories about popcorn if everybody wants to stay on afterwards, but I thought, most popcorn is consumed at movie theaters and sports stadiums. And so I figured that popcorn would be down as a result of coronavirus. It actually was up because we were all watching Netflix. But the issue is we don't buy popcorn in the same size quantities and in the same size containers that movie theaters do. So there's plenty of popcorn in the supply chain. It's just all in the wrong size container for a guy like Bradley Jackson to buy it. So, I mean, maybe not Bradley, but the rest of us, he can probably eat that much, but I can't. And so as we look through all this stuff, patio heaters, we're going to try to be outside this winter. Exercise equipment, we're going to try to be out. We're going to try to be working out because we're sitting inside eating, and then the list goes on and on. On the work side, shortages of truckers and drivers, shortages of frozen storage are going to should be on your minds if you have perishables. If you're building and adding to your business, like a lot of us built and added to our houses this summer, construction materials are going to be expensive, and the low prices on those and the services to build are going to be scarcer, and we're going to run out of favorable credit terms pretty soon from banks because they're a little bit over leveraged. So all of these things are the toilet papers of 2021, and there's probably a few more that all of you will come up with. So just some closing thoughts. I do think that we're going to obviously get through this, and I know there's going to be some questions maybe about, can we deliver the vaccines that are needed? And the answer is yes, we can do that. We may not be able to deliver them ubiquitously like you'd like to have them, but the vaccines, once they become available, we'll have about a 3 to 4 month lead time before we can get them to the average person. But there are people that are high priority that we can get them to almost immediately. Supply chains will become a little bit more localized as a result of this, and we'll start to rethink having overseas supply relationships. If we can find something local, if we can find local growers and local producers, we'll continue that down that path. Many restaurant chains have gone that way already, and I think other businesses will too. So there's going to be a little bit of a move to try to cut out China, and maybe for the wrong reasons, but maybe some of the right reasons as well. And I do think this will also accelerate the transitions we've already had towards automation and touchless things, but voice activated things. And so that's the direction I believe we're heading in. So anyway, I also, like Alan, I left time for questions, but I'm also watching my watch here and I realize that I'm about to get the hook. So I'll be polite and get off. It's very difficult for me to stay under 15 minutes. I'm gonna call it done now. So thanks all for listening. We're doing great at UT. I will answer any questions you have except things about the football team. I will defer that to my colleagues over in the athletic department. So anything else you want to talk about, let's do it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chad. We greatly appreciate it. Caroline, we probably don't have time for questions, but I'm thinking if they submit it in the chat, then we can certainly get those to Dr. Autry in a little bit. So thank you very much. Next, I'm going to introduce Larry Combs to kick off our pandemic response panel discussion to really give insight. We thought this was an important panel so that each and every one of you could really hear from companies about how they've been impacted and how they responded to the pandemic. Larry Combs is perhaps most importantly a former chair of the Tennessee Chamber Board of Directors. So, you know, Jack Daniels is a tremendous brand in Tennessee. They're also a tremendous member of the Tennessee Chamber and help us on a number of initiatives. And Larry can certainly explain more, but Jack Daniels is really the world's most popular whiskey in the world. So we're absolutely thrilled to have them here in Tennessee. They outsell any other American whiskey brand. Which is extremely impressive. They're sold in more than 170 countries around the world, and it's really the most valuable spirits brand in the world. So to have you all in Tennessee, we're thrilled. For those of you that know Larry, Larry is a tremendous leader, serving as a senior vice president and general manager of Jack Daniels, which is a substantial operation. So Larry always has his hands full. Graduated from the University of Louisville with a bachelor's of science in chemical engineering. In 1997, earned his MBA from Sullivan University in 2000. So Larry, we are thrilled to have you with us today, and I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Bradley, and great to see everyone, and happy to be here to help moderate this panel discussion. The topic we have today is pandemic response and the impact on America's supply chain. And to talk through these challenges and issues, we have representatives from two of our member companies. And first, I would like to introduce Dan Baker. He's president of Global Supply Chain, Smile Direct Club. Dan is responsible, Smile Direct Club, they're the teledentistry pioneer of doctor-directed remote clear aligner therapy. In his pivotal role, Dan drives innovation and leads a high-performing manufacturing team at Smile Direct Club's Nashville, Tennessee-based 3D printing manufacturing facility, one of the largest in the US. Under his leadership, the company has increased its production efficiencies to serve the clear aligner and retainer needs of its more than 1 million satisfied customers across the globe. With more than 25 years of experience, Dan joined Smile Direct Club in 2019 from Mars Pet Care, where he worked for 21 years, most recently as the company's vice president of supply. Dan led the company's supply strategy and led the transformation and operations across the $4.5 billion business. Dan earned a BS in chemistry and a PhD from the University of Strathclyde. And apologies if I messed that one up, Dan. So nice thank job. You again for agreeing to join the panel. And joining Dan is Todd Essick from Ray Products. Todd is the vice president of business development. He's the co-founder at Ray Products, and is currently responsible for business development, marketing, and project management. When not working, he chases his 5-year-old son and tries to be an exercise geek. So you can hopefully inspire me there a bit, Todd. He's married and grew up in Middle Tennessee, currently lives in Thompson Station. Todd got his BA in business from East Tennessee State and worked on an MBA at Belmont years ago, but abandoned that to race his mountain bikes. So Todd, really appreciate you joining us today, and thank both of you gentlemen. So I have a few questions that I thought could tee up our conversation, and we'll try to leave a couple minutes at the end for any questions from those on the call. So Dan, I thought I could start with you and sure. Just tell us how the pandemic, what disruptions you've experienced and how you've adapted to those.
Yeah, so thanks for having me this morning. You know, the pandemic brought us to our knees, right? It wasn't just a supply chain disruption; it was a complete business disruption. And pretty much overnight, the lifeblood of our business, which is our Smile shops here in North America and around the world, closed their doors, right? Consistent with the local authority guidelines and country guidelines. So, you know, we had a hard stop and had to think about how we rewired and brought our business back to life. And most importantly, I think, you know, for probably for this forum is focused on the supply chain. You know, our factory had to close as well. And I think that the element that I'd bring to the conversation this morning is, you know, the incredible ambiguity and uncertainty that supply chain workers have had to navigate, right? Not just us as business leaders, but it really has had a massive people impact. And so we closed our factory because our workers said they didn't feel safe. They didn't understand coronavirus. They were nervous about coming to work, and they stopped coming to work. And so they kind of forced us for a week to say, hey, we're just going to shut this factory for a week and reconsider, how do we make it safe? How do we rewire it? How do we socially distance the workstations, put in place extra cleaning, extra protocols, gloves, masks, all of the things that we now know to be commonplace and successful elements of bringing factories back to work. We had to rewire our whole factory here in Tennessee, just south of Nashville, in the space of a week. I think the last thing I'd give you is, you know, the thing that really helped us bring people back to work was actually, ironically, the pandemic. Because as one of the nation's largest 3D print fleets with 60 3D printers here, you know, we were able to repurpose a lot of that 3D print capacity to start making face shields for the frontline responders. And, you know, I think that gave people a real purpose to come back to work and a real sense of pride that we weren't just making clear teeth aligners, but we could actually help, you know, the people that were on the front line during the pandemic.
You know, it is great to hear that type of agility and flexibility that companies and manufacturers were able to pivot. We had a similar experience at Jack Daniel's early on, and getting the required PPE, getting the hand sanitizer was a particular challenge. And also that fear of people being at work. And so we were able to pivot and produce ethanol for hand sanitizer, which kind of gave people that added purpose in addition to helping them feel safe. So it's really, really challenging story, but great to hear how you guys are able to pivot. Todd, so same questions. So in your business, how did the pandemic impact Ray Products, and how did you adapt to that?
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so we were kind of the exact opposite. We had to ramp up.
Hey, Todd, this is Carolyn with the Chamber. It's a little hard to hear you. I don't know if you might can turn your mic up.
I tell you what, while Todd works on that, why don't we go on, and Dan, we can kind of go to the next question. And one of the things I was curious about is, what have you found most challenging now that's facing your supply chain? So now that you're back at work and you've kind of pivoted and have people back in the manufacturing, what are you facing?
You know, I think it was a journey, right? As soon as we started to come back to work after that 1 week, we started to ramp back production up slowly. You know, we started with 50 team members, and now we're back up to 1,000 in the factory here in Tennessee across a 4-shift, 24/7 operation. You know, I think the companies that have won during those early days were the companies that put their team members' health and safety first, right? And you know, there's plenty of examples, even in Tennessee and the surrounding communities that didn't do that, right? And they really suffered massive, widespread outbreaks that brought them to their knees, right? In terms of the number of workers that tested positive. And, you know, the Chamber certainly helped us. And it's, you know, the Healthy Business Certification and providing the playbook really that interpreted the CDC guidelines and made them digestible for lots of local companies to say, if you do A, B, C, D, E, F, G, you're going to be in good shape. So that was certainly one of the challenges that we faced, that we had a lot of help to overcome. I think after that, it's then, you know, a case of looking at your whole supply chain. And as the speakers this morning have reminded us, you know, you've got to analyze and rerun the planning models and the scenarios. You've got to rewire, you know, and de-risk and find contingencies. I think you've got to find ways to be more agile and responsive. You've got to look at the short term and the long term and look at different alternative and additional suppliers, particularly ones that can be closer to home rather than global ones. And, ultimately, some businesses then also, went long on inventory. And in a time when cash was king, because we didn't know how long this pandemic was going to last, not surprisingly, we saw a lot of supply chain volatility. And we touched on the areas that, were close to home with eggs and milk and bacon and fresh meat and all those, and toilet rolls. It was an incredible time for us to rewire our business. And what we saw was customer behavior was traditionally people would go and start their smile journey in a smile shop. But because the smile shop was closed, they had to revert back to the roots of this business, which started with an impression kit that you could then order in the safety and comfort of your home, your own home, but still start, the smile journey and get the smile that you've always dreamed of. So, in a nutshell, money was tight, the pressure was on. And I think that's when supply chain folks do their best work, right? They're creative and they bring their best to work every day, and the show must go on, right? And we found a way to do that, not just safely, but creatively. And we've come out of it with a lot of momentum and an even better supply chain because of that, as I look forward into 2021.
I think problem solving is definitely in our DNA for certain.
For sure.
Todd, I'll circle back and see if your mic is a little better.
Larry, is that any better? Is that audible?
Still very, very low.
I'm gonna go grab some. Hang on.
Okay. Well, we'll keep going and I'll circle back here at the end because we would really like to hear, how it has impacted your business and some of what you've done. I look at our supply chain at Jack Daniel's, and it's, given that everything is made in Lynchburg, Tennessee, it's a very US centric supply chain. And so the big challenge early on for us, as you said, Dan, were our suppliers, first tier, second tier suppliers, and what were their practices? Did they have a playbook? Because that was probably our biggest risk initially. Volatility in certainly demand swung incredibly as on-premise, restaurants and bars closed. The one thing we know is when times are good, people will drink. When times are bad, people will drink. It's just figuring out where and what bottle size and how much. But so we've kind of worked our way through that. The last question, just to leave a little bit of time for any questions from the audience, is just thinking about all this adaptation and agility and rethinking the supply chain and rethinking the manufacturing workspace and what that looks like. What are some of the changes that you've had to implement or some of the learnings that you see becoming permanent?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I don't think there's necessarily anything that I think will be what I would say permanent at this stage. I think we're still testing and learning, but I think some of the elements have proven to be good for business, right? And make good sense for our team members to remain safe and for our business and for our customers, right? Recognizing that a happy customer gets their product earlier. So we've actually come out of this pandemic delivering better service than we've ever delivered. And we've rewired our capacity model and our customer service model, and we've really doubled down on that customer experience. And so I think as I look forward, and the two speakers this morning teed me up perfectly. I think next time it happens, we'll have the playbooks ready to go. And we won't have to sort of figure it out from home plate. We'll already be sort of rounded third with a lot of momentum. It'll be different the next pandemic or whatever the root cause might be, but I certainly think that we've now built the muscle around problem solving and risk assessment and contingency planning. That means we won't end up in the situation we ended up before, where we were arguably unprepared and probably got lucky that this business in its nature could pivot quickly. Like Jack Daniel's, we're 85% domestic and 15% international, but we were able to pivot really quickly. And so I think the key thing for us is we'll be better prepared because of what we've just been through, because we've now got the playbooks and the toolkits ready to go. And it's just about refreshing those now and making sure that where we have got risk, we've de-risked it and we've got contingencies. So we've got different levers that we can pull and twist.
Great. Now, I do think one of the things coming out of this, I think earlier in the presentations, it was mentioned that oftentimes supply chain is looked at as a cost lever, and we do run those very lean. And I think that excess capacity and flexibility and how we think about suppliers is probably
Yeah.
going to fundamentally change,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
How much you might insource, having redundant suppliers, and weighing risk versus cost maybe a little differently going forward.
You know, we're blessed here at Smile Direct Club, where our business model is such that it's less about over-indexing on efficiency, right? Because we're a customer service business and each smile that we create is unique, it's much more about value creation. And so we're actually a small volume, high value business. You know, total tonnage through my factory is probably only a couple of hundred tons a year, yet we're a $750 million business. And so, you know, the key charge for the supply chain here is to be agile, responsive, and deliver consistently great customer service, and do that in a way that gives the business and the customer great value for money, but without over-indexing on the efficiency that, you know, the professor alluded to earlier, which is, you know, has been the pitfall and the common misconception and probably the Achilles heel of many supply chains, right? Particularly in the FMCG world. They've had to over-index towards efficiency, particularly as customers have migrated their behavior and shopping trends to online, right? Which has increased the pressure even more. We're fortunate we don't have those pressures. And because of that, you know, it's a great business to work in.
Great. Thank you for that. Todd, one last check-in. Apologies for the technology glitch, but want to see if we can get a word in from you.
Is this any better at all?
No better. So thanks for at least giving it a shot, Todd. We really do appreciate it. Yeah, I think one of the things, Dan, you brought up earlier too, in that early part of the pandemic, and where a lot of companies weren't as prepared as we should have been. We didn't have a pandemic that high on our risk register, so to speak. And I do have to give credit to the chamber and to the other member companies, because in that early phase, the ability to come together, and Bradley and the team facilitated that, just to understand, well, what are you doing? What are you seeing? How are you reacting? The decisions we all had to make to shut down, not to shut down, for how long. I think that was really critical in doing it right in the early phases of this, for certain. So certainly want to give the chamber credit for that. And then when I look at beyond the supply chain, but how we work and what the workspace might look like, I think some of the changes that we've made that might become more permanent is, you know, we had to become creative and figure out, you know, geofencing instead of time clocks, you know, things of that nature, eliminating touch points, looking at sanitation differently, looking at spacing differently. I think a lot of that, at least in the manufacturing environment, will likely change, or at least stay in that direction longer term. So with that, Carolyn, I don't know if we have any questions for the panel, because I think we're right at our time.
We are. There aren't any questions right now that are in the chat, but what a great discussion. And Todd, I'm so sorry about your audio. I know hopefully we might be able to plug you in another time, because I know you have some great information that we
can't get shared today. But Dan and Larry, thank you both so much. I think we're going to go over to Susie and just have some closing comments, but really appreciate all the discussion.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Great. Thank you all so much. What a great conversation today on supply chain. Please join us next week, November 24th, the same time, 11 o'clock, with our last manufacturing roadshow, recovery roadshow, and that will focus on the future of manufacturing and focus a little on the political changes that we might see. Thank you all. Thank you for all the speakers taking your time today. We enjoyed it so much, and thank you for our sponsors. And we hope to see you next Tuesday, November 24th. Thank you so much.
Take care.